Yes, we'll be back from the break. Still watching Smart Means Business. I'm Andrew Barigi, your host. Now, heading straight into the Caribbean East Africa, we kickstart off with an international fund deputy deputy chief who tackles, that is the tax backlash in the Kenya visit. Now, the International Monetary Fund deputy managing director, that is Nigel Clark, traveled to Kenya on his first overseas trip since joining the fund leadership in October. That is meeting major stakeholders, including President Ruto, Central Bank, Central Bank Governor, and also the Treasury Cabinet, John Mbadi, and the Treasury Principal Secretary, that is Dr. Christo Kipto. Now, on the recent criticism against the multilateral lender resulting from the stringent taxation measures imposed by the Kenyan government, the International Monetary Fund distanced itself from holding their individual country decisions, and they say that the decisions remain within the domain of the authorities. Now, the controversial bill 2024 containing tax hikes was actually fronted to Parliament and was met with public resentment, ending the deadly protests. Now, Kenya agreed to a 4-year arrangement with the International Monetary Fund in 2021, subsequently signing for additional lending support to support climate change measures in May 2023. Of course, taking its IMF loan access to about $3.6 billion. Now, specific revenue measures are not a design of the International Monetary Fund. Now, the specific choices made are totally within the preview of the Kenyan government. This, according to Dr. Nigel Clark, said in a media roundtable that was on Tuesday. Now, in October, Kenya secured at least $606 million from the International Monetary Fund after a completion of the 7th and 8th reviews under the program, with the final review expected in April 2025. Now, Kenya had requested a governance diagnostic review in October, which the deputy managing director welcomed, and of course confirming that it will be done in the early weeks of 2025. Now, according to what he said that we expect that emission will actually be fielded early in the new year. Now, Clark noted. Now, however, the International Monetary Fund held that they cannot resolve all the governance issues in the country, but will only lay out a roadmap towards reforms through engagement of authorities. Now, the Clark added that the International Monetary Fund will actually support Kenya either through a program or indirectly. Now, they say that they will have a number of means of supporting Kenya, whether in the program or outside of it. Now, he concluded for that matter. So let us see how this visitation really turns out to be, most especially on the side of the Kenyans. All right, away from that now, as we head into other reports still coming into from Kenya. Now let's take a look at the World Bank. The World Bank, which trims Kenya's 2024 economic growth outlook, that is to about 4.7%. Now, the World Bank has actually downgraded Kenya's economic growth forecast, that is for the year, to about 4.7% from an initial 5% forecast in June 2024, all lower than the 5.6% recorded in 2023. Now, the downward revision of the pre-pandemic average levels was actually driven by the severe floods in April and the deadly anti-finance bill protests in June. Now, the World Bank expects a 5% growth in 2026, slower than a 5.3% it had estimated earlier, citing further fiscal slippages, extreme weather events, and external economic challenges as the main risks. Now, the revised estimate, however, remains above 3% sub-Saharan Africa average, with a Washington-based lender positive about the fiscal discipline and the prudent management that will not be critical for long-term stability. Now, growth According to the reports, growth in 2024 estimated at about 4%, a downward revision from the June 2024 economic update following the headwinds that have already impacted headline growth during the year, including severe floods in quarter two of 2024. Now, this subdued business sentiment following the mid-2024 protest, a tighter monetary policy, and ongoing fiscal consolidation. Now, this according to what the World Bank noted in Kenya Economic Update Report. Now, in the Economic Update Report published twice a year, the World Bank noted the mixed revenue targets, including the revenue targets continue to ail the budgeting process owing to the overly optimistic revenue targets leading to budget shortfalls. Now, higher budget service costs from the increased reliance on high interest rates, domestic borrowing has actually also put pressure on the fiscal space, with Kenya still facing high risks of debt distress. Now, the report still noted that business confidence remained subdued in the year, with jittery sentiments in the private sector growth. Now, further, the severe floods in April affected livelihoods of households, mostly in urban areas, limiting growth in private consumption. Now, the construction sector was affected by what we call the high real interest rates amid the weaker housing demand, which negatively impacted the headline growth. Now, the multilateral lender, however, noted that lower inflation, adequate weather conditions, and easing monetary policy will actually support disposable incomes of the private sector by actually boosting consumption and spur economic growth. Now, non-performing loans increased, highlighting the credit risks that is in the banking sector, with borrowers facing the hurdle in the high interest rates regime. Now, according to the World Bank, senior economic analysts said that while the fiscal deficit remains high, its steady decline offers a key opportunity to further reduce state vulnerabilities through strategic revenue mobilization, talking about fiscal discipline and growth-oriented policies, said Naomi Matangi. This is the World Bank senior economic analyst in relation to that. And that is it from the Karibu report. And now let's switching to the international, as we take a look at what's happening onto the international side. Let's take a look at the African startups. And according to the reports, there is what we call a winter when it comes to funding these startups. But now, a report has surfaced on how these startups can actually position for success during the African tech ecosystem funding winter. Now, the global funding slowdown has particularly hit African startups hard, with venture funding seeing the most, a 40% on-year decline when comparing to 2023 and 2024, according to Africa. That is the big deal. According to Africa, the big deal. Now, while sectors like artificial intelligence, healthcare, talking about financial services globally, have actually seen recoveries in investor interest, African startups actually face a differently challenging environment. Now, from the continent's perspective, African investors are stepping up to fill the gaps left by slower and retreating foreign capital over the last 2 years. And according to Semaphore, recent data from the several funds reveals that over half of the $1 billion in capital remains available for startups to access and further the continent's innovation. Now, startups need more than innovate products to unlock this funding. Now, they need a proactive approach to visibility and storytelling. Now, as the funding winter forces startups to become learner, a triggering natural selection process kicks into balance the excess of the investment boom in interest. As we see now, the startups that actually thrive in this environment and get investor interest are those that that can survive through operation efficiency, maintain consistency, visibility, and demonstrate a clear path to sustain long-term growth. Now, the influx in capital in the past years highlighted the continent's potential for innovation, talking about the growth, and this potential remains valid today with the continuous advancements in the talent pool and infrastructure. However, visibility is now a critical performance. Now, implying positioning efforts should actually not be limited to fundraisers, but startups can actually leverage communication opportunities by identifying the key points and translating complex issues into compelling content. Now, by leveraging data, that is to tell authentic stories, startups can actually identify metrics, their operations, and turn these into compelling narratives that actually resonate with their stakeholders. Now, startups must actually embrace storytelling to humanize their brand, highlight achievements, and firm their relevance in increasing competitive market. Now, transparent communication about the challenges and milestones fosters trust with both investors and the public, solidifying credibility. Now, as funding rounds grow more cautious, must go beyond showcasing fundamentals like product market fit and integrate strategic communication plans. Now, by weaving public relations and consistent messaging into their core strategy, we see that actually companies can stand a better chance of remaining top of mind for the investors, users, and the broader ecosystem. Now, simply doing the work is not enough. Yeah, simply doing the work is not enough. This is according to what the report really says. Doing the work is not enough. Startups must also talk about it. Sales and communication should actually not be competing priorities. Instead, complementary paths that together drive long-standing growth. As the year winds up, startups need strategies that align communication efforts with the company goals. Now, this is according to how the startups can actually position themselves for the funding, despite the funding gap that is still existent in here. So what you can do differently is that simply doing work is not enough, but also talking about communication skills. Communication skills have been highlighted to be very essential here. Sharing milestone progress and lessons learned, developing a comprehensive communications plan. So this is what startups can actually do differently if they are to really come into the competitive space of funding, because there is a huge gap. And according to what we see, it seems like African entrepreneurs are actually taking the initiative to make sure that they actually take up this space. Now they start to fund these startups instead of the foreign investors that have tight strings attached to most of the loans. Well, finally, as we wind up the Karibu East Africa and the International Updates report, let's take a look at India's economy. Now, of course, we know that it's among the fastest growing economies, but there is a question here that is the fastest growing big economy losing steam? Is the fastest, biggest growing economy losing steam? Now, the latest GDP numbers paint a sobering picture between July and September. Now, India's economy slumped to a 7-quarter low to about 5.4%, well below the Reserve Bank of India forecast of about 7%. Now, while it is still robust compared with developed nations, the figure signals a slowdown. Now, economists attribute this to several factors. Consumer demand that has weakened private investment and has been sluggish for years, and government spending. Now, this is an essential driver in the recent years. Now, this has pulled back, and India's goods exports have actually struggled, with at least their global share starting at a mere 2% in 2023. Now, fast-moving consumer goods companies report tepid sales, while salary bills at publicly traded firms, a proxy for robust wages, shrunk last quarter. Now, even the previous bullish RBI has actually revised a growth forecast to 6.6% for the financial year 2024-2025. Now, Finance Minister, that is Namara Tarama, paints a brighter picture. Now, she said last week that the decline was not systematic, but a result of reducing government spending during an election-focused quarter. Now, she expected third quarter growth to offset the recent decline. And we see that India will probably remain the fastest growing major economy, despite the challenges like stagnant wages affecting the domestic consumption, slowing global demand, and climate disruptions in agriculture. Now, this is what she said. Now, including a senior minister, that is the federal government, economists, and former member of RBI's monetary policy group, they urge, the central bank's focus on curbing inflation, which has led to excessively restrictive interest rates, potentially stifling growth. Now, high rates make borrowing more expensive for businesses and consumers and potentially reduce investments and dampen consumption, both key drivers of economic growth. Now, the RBI kept interest rates unchanged for nearly 2 years, primarily because of the rising inflation. Now, India's inflation surged to 6.2% in October, breaching the central bank's target ceiling, that is of 4%, and reaching a 14-month high, according to the official data. Now, it was mainly driven by food prices, comprising of half of the consumer price basket. Vegetable prices, for example, they rose to more than 40% in October. And we see that there is also growing signs that food price hikes are now influencing other everyday costs, all the core inflation. But high interest rates alone may not fully explain the slowing growth. Now, lowering interest rates won't spark growth unless consumption demand is actually strong. Now, investors borrow and invest only when demand exists, and that's not the case now. This is according to Himanshu, the development economist at Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University. However, the RBI's outgoing governor believes that India's growth story remains intact, adding that the balance between inflation and growth is still well poised. Now, economists point out that despite the record high detail, the credit and rising unsecured loans indicating people borrowing to finance consumption even amidst high interest rates. Now, urban demand is actually weakening. Rural demand is actually a brighter spot, benefiting from a good monsoon and higher food prices. Now, as we see that critics warn that the hyping up the narrative of India as the fastest growing economy is actually hindering essential reforms to boost investment, exports, and job creation. We are still a poor country, this according to what some of the experts say. Now, our per capita GDP is less than $3,000, while the United States is at $86,000. So if you're saying we are growing faster than them, then it makes no sense at all. This is according to Ms. Sangyupta. Now, in other words, India requires a significantly higher sustainable growth rate to actually generate more jobs and raise incomes. Now, boosting growth and consumption will not be easy in the short term. As we see that lacking private investment, Himanshu suggests that raising the wages through government run-up employment schemes to increase incomes and spark consumption. Now, others like Ms. Sangyupta advocate for reducing tariffs and attracting export investments, moving away from China to countries like Vietnam. Now, the government remains still unbeat over the India story. Now, banks are strong, forex reserves are robust, finances stable, and extremely poverty has actually declined. Now, the chief economist advisor, Anantha, says that the latest gross domestic product should actually not ever be interrupted. And they're saying that they should not throw the baby out of the bathwater as the underlying growth story remains intact. he said in the recent meeting. Now, clearly, the pace of growth could actually do with some picking up. That is why skepticism lingers. But the race donation is ambitious for as long as without taking adequate steps to fulfill that ambition. Now, India, as many say, it's one of the fastest growing economies, but the report here shows us that despite all this, the economy is actually losing a lot of steam. You know, there is a comparison of income per capita in India, $3,000 annually. In America, $86,000. So there is a lot that has to be done. And sometimes the narrative that the country is actually a fast-growing economy is perhaps the reason as to why the reforms that should be put in place are not actually being put in place, because there is that comfort that comes among the policymakers that we are the fast-growing economy. That comfort is very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. And I remember Uganda, when we had a case scenario where there was a suggestion that actually Uganda is a middle-income country. And majority of the, experts, people, the citizens believed it actually. And it was some sort of an illusion if you were to take a look at it from, a huge perspective. Well, let's get into the break. For now, I'll be returning with our inspiration moment. Stick around.